Hey, everybody. Welcome back. Sorry for the little delay. It's and while we are waiting, maybe for anybody else who was going to join in, um, we can make a quick agenda item. We'll try to keep this short, not go all the way. But I think at that same time, what I was starting to think about is have a discussion around uh, common collectives and moving projects forward. That was one big thing on my end. I saw several sets of very common questions that people had raised. It would be very valuable to go through them and kind of we can all reflect upon those questions and share them. But the biggest of all that I wanted to do is for this was uh, also just hear people's thoughts and feedback as well on the process itself. And maybe I'm thinking, let's do that feedback side as the very end so that different people from different contexts get a chance to share a little bit of how, what was their experience like engaging here. And based on what we're proposing next, they can provide feedback. Um, let's wait for maybe a minute or two. So those were three big agenda items that I was going to cover. Do people want to add other agenda items to it? Uh,
I think those sound great. And then also I would just add like at the end of this, hopefully we can have like a concrete set of things that, so people can know, here's what we're doing going forward in terms of, class meeting time and you know, how everything's going to be
I'll
handled.
summarize. Yeah, we can summarize in the end. I think the the lesson or kind of my proposal would really be around is it's not one size fits all type of an approach. Every team will have extreme flexibility on what we want to achieve in the end, and based on that, those approaches will change. But on the other hand, the other thing we're going to try to do is continue the community context. So whenever people do want, we are all here together for those specific sets of teams. So I think, yeah, there will be these two possible options. Um, okay, so let me just first say officially, first of all, thank you for everyone who participated in this class. This was a wild experiment when I was thinking about this in the context of what we could do in a pandemic and what we should do for the last, I've been planning this class for the last 6 years, and it has been on the back burner because always something more important comes by. And I'm happy to say this is probably the most important class that I have ever taught, and also probably the most important group of people that we have had the chance to engage with. Uh, when we proposed it, there was a lot of administrative hurdles, whether we could even do something like this or not. And I think it's just very, very clear that teaching should be done like this. It is incredible what you all bring to the table. I mean, I don't have to say this because you've all worked with each other, but just the importance of diversity of people connecting from so many disciplines and so many places. It has just been an absolute joy. So I just want to, from the bottom of my heart, thank you everyone for who has participated. Uh, every one of you is an accomplished, artist, scientist, explorer. But for you to give time to a broader community is extremely valuable. I think sometimes there is this friction between what is academia and what is done in a much more structured manner versus what is done by groups of people who come together who are very passionate about a problem. I think this was a great, personally, I mean, I didn't need any persuasion. I knew this is the right way to do things, but it was just a testament for how far all of you came, but just also the collegiality and the humbleness that you all bring to the table. Maybe the theme of making science and technology accessible to a broader group of people attracts a certain kind of people, and that's why we are who we are. uh, but on the other hand, it is such an honor to know each one of you now much more personally. And I think over the years, my hope is that this kind of a relationship will turn into long lasting friendships. I don't say that in the end of my normal classes, but I had to say this because I felt even the short time that we spent in this class, particularly, I've gotten to know many of you as individuals and as characters that are just so colorful. Is That's the best word that I can describe. So just thank you from the bottom of my heart. And I think this goes out to the mentors. Frankly, I was initially thinking about a much more formal definition of who mentors are, and I started realizing after first and second classes that literally everybody is a mentor. All of you have played important roles in other teams and other people's projects, and you brought so much to the table already. That definition kind of dissolved for me in some sense. So, but very specifically for many of you who have hung out with us, Emmanuel, Fabian, John, Kevin, every single person who has been part of this entire process. And again, the the approach that we will take in the future will really be that we grow in a context of the class itself. We grow the number of people that we can also engage, but that are like-minded. I think there is something very important to say here. Uh, there are many ways of doing science, and sometimes you have to find like-minded people, and that's the reality of it. Otherwise the whole thing doesn't click, and somehow we ended up finding like-minded people. So I don't want to make it a rant, but very important for me to just start by saying thank you. And then finally, also on the logistics front, I had requested that, hey, we should get 3 TAs for this class. This is going to be a massive class. And I got a response from the department that's like, no, you get no TAs. I was like, what? And then after a lot of push and shove, it ended up, it technically they gave me 3 TAs because they gave me Tyler. And he by himself is a force of nature. So I think thank you so much, Tyler. It meant a lot. And I think usually it's been a tough time on all of us just personally as well. And so especially having somebody who's very caring has mattered too much. And I think this is also the part of course, science moves on, but caring for each other is sometimes more important. So I think thank you for actually doing that. We've had lots of conversations on that front. Okay, so that's all. I wanted to say this just so that I get a chance to say thank you, because all of you got a chance to express yourself a little bit. Then now let's dive into logistics. Before we do that, maybe any of the mentors, if they want to make a comment, if they haven't had the chance to express kind of their broader viewpoints. Maybe I'm looking at Emmanuel, Manish, anybody else who has certain aspects of what they thought this class would be and what it ended up being. If anybody wants to, and also set the agenda for the discussion also, if there is any sets of things that people think we should cover. And then I'll dive into the logistics of projects. So I don't know, Manish, Emmanuel, I'm looking through my screen. Fabian, I know couldn't join today. But yeah, any comments, broader things to add? Okay, so Emmanuel's, okay, maybe we'll do that in the very end, actually. Let's just dive into the agenda points because we have a lot to cover on that front. So I think the first thread that I wanted to say, and again, this is something that I'm looking for feedback from people. My intuition, I mean, first of all, where we are in our projects and all the progress that individual teams have made is far along that you have all literally, I looked through all the videos again last night because as I was starting to think about this, you've made a tremendous amount of progress. And I would kind of think about it as you're right in the middle of what is called being in a cloud. In a given project, when you're literally in the middle of it, you've had that aha moment, and now there is this transition point of really cracking the problem versus I think it's very clear that the approaches have been very thoughtful. So my view of us as a class and as a community is much more staying focused and honest to the problems that we began with. Of course, there is a much more general parameter around where uh, the projects that you're working on fall in a broader space. And my proposal would be is that, of course, the teams and individual teams can expand. You can bring more people to the table. But as a team, you have, first of all, complete autonomy on how you want to proceed forward. So, if you want to bring on mentors, more number of people on board, that is all dependent on the teams. I think it's very important to remember as a team to be inclusive about it and make decisions collectively. But the biggest thing that I would advise, just from experience, is uh, not to just rapidly expand for the sake of expansion. There is something quite beautiful with struggling with the problem that you are working on, because you have to remember this is not just about the projects that you're working on. This is also personal growth and personal journey. There are lots of open source community platforms like Joggle and many other, where there are tons and tons of people that come together. Sometimes they're so big that you can't even count the number of people that they're in. There's something very special about working in a small team on a very directed problem. So my first advice for all the projects is to stay grounded and humble in the approach of saying, we still haven't cracked the problem. We still have not as yet helped an individual. And then when you help one individual, that actually leads to this cascade that has the potential to grow to 10 individuals and then orders of magnitude beyond that. So my biggest advice would be is to that we remain focused on, and although the official class is over, we remain focused on the projects to get them to a landmark in which there is an object that you are handing off to another person to give you feedback. And before that, it wouldn't make sense to be uh, expanding in a manner. And of course, anybody else, we will be very transparent and public about it. So every project with the Notion pages, whenever we want, we can make those pages public. You can recruit very specifically, but keep that in mind. That is kind of the one big feedback is, uh, although we have made a tremendous amount of progress, there is still, there is this moment that happens in a project to say, okay, now we are ready to go live, which is we can get feedback from a user that you were trying to work for. So that was point number one. And then this will really come from the teams remaining coherent. There might be a few teams that just don't have enough team members. And in that case, I think it does make sense to try to expand. But it's also one obvious thing that we have noticed it in this entire group. There have been several folks and several projects that have common themes and common technical expertise. So we can now cross fertilize back again, which we were trying to avoid in the class because I wanted all of you to be focused. But we can do that. But still, just always my tendency is that beyond a certain number of people, it is almost impossible to make decisions unless you can break the problem into many, many, many pieces. So that was point number one. Um, the second thing that I wanted to mention, and again, this is all open for feedback because, as I said, the point number zero is all teams have absolute autonomy. And as long as you do this in a democratic manner in your team, all your decisions, the fun of science is you make your own mistakes. And I don't want to deprive you of that. You make your own mistakes. I think it's very important. But moving forward on that, just make sure that you are not excluding anybody in your team, whatever their circumstances are. They might not have enough time sometimes. It's okay. Some members move faster than others. That's okay. But as long as they're just in the chain and they can themselves see and figure out how much they can contribute per se. Uh, the second point that I was going to mention, which is again a proposal, is I definitely want to make some of the work that we've all done collectively public, and how much of that work that you want to make public will depend on independent teams themselves. So the Notion page has an option of creating a public Notion inside your Notion page. And what I would like to do, and I think there is a strategic role for that, which is to get support and to get some amount of external validation sometimes is also fun. That there is a day that you are waiting for some motivation and you receive an email from somebody saying, hey, I saw your project, it was amazing, and blah blah blah, and I do this. That helps. So in some sense, what I would like is for us to have links to sub portion of your Notion pages. And then up till now, you've been using your Notion pages as lab notebooks. You don't have to put all your lab notebooks out there, but a condensed version of it can be public. And of course, our talks that you've all given can be public. If anybody ever feels that they don't want either their presentation or any part of their pages or work to not be accessible on a public domain, this is again a decision that you should make. I'm not going to enforce it. I do believe sharing allows projects to grow. I am a firm believer. I would have never met people like Emmanuel and Manish if I had never shared whatever I did and I kept a secret about it. So it's very valuable to find like-minded people if you're willing to share. I think I can also completely understand that sometimes there is a moment when you're really trying to get something done that you don't want to publicly share it as yet. But again, this is another decision that you should all make. But I will be restructuring the project or the class web page to reflect and make links to all the projects that are done. And I think this will also be a historic record because we will be teaching this class, and many of you will be participants now in teaching this class. I'm going to rope you all in for the next cohort of batch that will arrive. But this will also be for historic record as well, to kind of give people a grounding for what we meant by when we started this class per se. So that's item number 2. And then the last one, which is probably focused a little bit on resources. I think there are certain projects that sometimes require a specific kind of resources. Sometimes they're financial. Sometimes it might literally be that the project that you started becomes your life's goal and you literally want to support yourself with that as well. So I think keep that in mind. That is not an unknown and uncommon factor. But from a perspective of resources, the way that I've been thinking about is how do we leverage the resources that we all also have collectively. And I'm going to use Fur as an example here, just as always, of, she had shared some of the graphics of her work. And then I know many of you are working where the actual product is literally a graphics outcome. And suddenly, you can kind of engage her or engage people like her. She can make contacts for somebody. And I think these types of internal resources, but being mindful of the fact that you don't want to kind of I think this should be a decision that individuals make. And of course, you have to understand that their capacity of what they can do and share, and also, their capacity of figuring out a way to support. There is other kinds of resources. For example, some of us have lab access. Some of us have machine shop access. Some of us have Fab Labs access. There is on the site itself, whether we make it publicly available or not, but internally as a group, I would love for us to create a Notion page where each one of us says, hey, I am good at this and I happen to have this, and I would be very willing to both advise and share some of what I have. And it'll be very valuable for folks who are in a situation where they just might not have the capacity to proceed their projects unless somebody helps on the fabrication fronts, for example. And I think we will do this much more as an organic kind of a sense. It'll still be your individual choice if you can do something for another team that you might not be part of. This is a resource we won't share outside because, of course, we're not a public service, but I did realize that some of you have capacity of doing certain things that might be valuable for the other teams, for example. And this is a resource page that we should just create, just like the idea board that we did. And now people also know, each one of you, that we can just create something along the way. So that was another big agenda item that we should cover in terms of resources. And then last comment, and then we will turn into a discussion, is moving projects forward. What I would like us all to do, to still collectively as individual teams still keep meeting on whatever regular basis that the teams have decided to. So although the official class is over, and there will be time to time that we will all come together like this to just update, but it's, to me, what is far more important is that your project teams can remain coherent. And for that purpose, what I'm going to do is, starting next week, and again, this is true for every mentor or anybody who else has engaged, we will just publicly announce that, oh, we are getting together to discuss space debris, and there will be kind of a session, and anybody else who wants to listen in or chime in or engage can join. And we will try to do this scheduling just based on how often the teams themselves are internally meeting. But then I want to just personally, on my end, spend a little bit time with every team to just make sure, because you guys are all in a very critical transition points of having an incredible idea. And then some of you might be stuck on what should be the most important next step you should take, or it might be that you are at a critical decision point to say whether this approach really makes sense or not. So that would be the other thing that we would try to do, is to do a one-on-one meeting. So I think I'm going to send some slots basically uh, next week all the way through the Christmas. We don't have to rush them in any way. And this is also just true for all the mentors as well, because let's make sure this is really the moment of a make or break of a team, uh, because now we don't have this formal requirement, but I'm assuming that you're enjoying what you're doing enough that you have an internal drive to actually keep continuing it. Although there are no formal requirements to continue. I gave you guys grades last night. You all get an A plus. I mean, there is no formal grades per se, but I just have to say, I am just floored. I just could not. I was so happy watching the talks last night that it just, I literally, I've never done that in my life, ever given an A plus to the entire class. But just, it was, that was not the point. But I think you know how I feel about this, so I don't have to mention that. um, okay, I that's all I wanted to roughly say around the general principles and guidance that I have. um, so, oh, I see a question from Subir about how to the model for the class. I think we had a discussion with Fabian 2 days ago. There was a proposal that's out there to sort of uh, structure classes and share. And I think it would be very valuable. And of course, we can document some of how we ran this class, and anybody can literally replicate that structure. uh, it's very valuable to replicate it locally, because I think some of it is very context dependent and from where we all came together. And you might find completely different kinds of problems that you have to tackle. But I think, to me, the international nature of this class was such a joy. And I'm sure this is 2 a.m., 3 a.m. right now in India, and many of you are still connected. And the same is true for many people around the world. Uh, this is also why I am a little bit hesitant on my end to just not just expand to be a very large community where there is no personal connections. I've seen projects like this. I remember when the Fab Lab network started, and Leo and Rico, probably they were not there at the very early stages. It was extremely important to have that close net sense of trust among the people that are the core, and eventually that starts to grow. But there is something that we kind of have to accomplish on our end, and at that same time be very thoughtful of. So this is why, I mean, of course, anybody can use a structure like this to teach, and many of you are teachers. It would be phenomenal to actually structure something like this, but maybe even with more focus. Maybe we can run something like this much more focused on the environment, much more focused on the health. So uh, and I think my goal is to do this once a year at the least, while we spend the whole year with those projects. So we at the my intuition is in a year from now, which for all of you might sound like, oh my goodness, that's a long time. I would have achieved all the goals that I have. And I can tell you already, in a year from now is literally the time you need. You've chosen such ambitious projects. It takes that long to build and deliver something that you truly believe is what's. So at least when you're thinking about the scope of this, at least be thinking about the my mentors used to tell me this: if you assume how long something will take, multiply that by a factor of pi, and that's how long it actually takes in science. So I just want you to brace for this, that this is not a quick thing that you can just do and get done with. If you want to be honest about the goal, like what Rico and the telescope team has on, you know, this resolution at this price point, with the kind of robustness that a kid can look at, it is a tough goal. It's not trivial. And even if you have all the pieces in place, it is going to take that last bit mile. And the last mile matters a lot. So um, we will try to do this in a manner where we can recurrently meet on a regular basis that is dependent on the team. And then maybe once a month or on whatever time frame people like, we will all socially connect. And then in that social connection where we do this long term, people can just update what we have been doing as a teams. But my proposal is that I would love for this to be a close knit community for a year. If you have a few team members that you really want to bring on, of course, they're always welcome. But I don't want this to be a 10x large community and then we just don't know each other, and there is some vague philosophical guideline, but we're not really making progress. And sometimes in those communities, I've been part of many of those communities, it feels good to be part of it, but we're not actually achieving what we want to achieve. So this is kind of the only philosophical thing that I am looking at. And again, it depends on all of you. I am completely open on that front to getting feedback on that front. But I have a strong intuition about just working with a close knit. And again, your team is really, truly your extreme close knit community, because that's what you really have to nurture. And we will try to nurture this broader community, and then we will see how far we reach in a year's time. And then we will explore what we can do on a much larger scale. Okay, so I'll
And
stop.
real quick, Manu,
Go ahead.
I'm seeing a really great question in the chat of how do they, how can teams like engage the mentors now that, in the upcoming thing, now that it's like they've got this autonomy?
Yeah, I think the biggest factor was the first group of mentors that I brought on the table were just my personal friends and people I trusted. So this was not a random list of people. Like the fact that Emmanuel is on the line right now is just because we have this kind of a relationship of trust. And I can only vouch for the people that I know and work for and engage with. But again, of course, every group will have autonomy to reach out to broader group of people, get feedback. But you guys are all, I think in science, you will find out that there is a certain group of people that believe in this broader open philosophy of sharing things. And then there are other group of people that operate in a much more traditional sets of approaches, but you can still take feedback and then you make those sets of decisions. And I think often enough, what ends up happening is uh, whenever you are planning on this, is to make sure that any commitments you make to someone should be based on some thought and decision. So don't commit to anything immediately. Approach lots of people, get feedback from lots of people, and then eventually you will find certain sets that you feel line up with the philosophy of the project. Because the the thing that I'm a little bit worried about sometimes is that uh, as long as you are the anchor of where you want to take your projects, like the mining one is a great example. It's very easy for, like, even me, I had to really resist myself to not make it purely a technical project, because I really felt that there is something deeply technical that could be done. But I think it was just absolutely amazing because we had a grounded team, which the social context of it, just we have to keep thinking about that. And this is what happens when you are looking and recruiting mentors, that they are trying to listen to you as compared to fit you in that mold of what they might have been thinking about. So as long as you're aware of that, I think, and of course, all the people that in our network, I'll open up my network a little bit more as well. Uh, you can always write to anybody and CC me, and I can then, once I see the email, always ask for very concrete requests. Sometimes it's just a 5-minute meeting, sometimes it's samples, and then I'll always chime in and say, could you please? And that way I can bridge something along those lines. Sometimes there are individuals I might have mentioned that I was going to introduce you once we reach a milestone. At this point, you've all reached a milestone. You have something to show for it, because it doesn't help to try to engage with somebody if you have nothing to show for it. It feels like you have not done your homework, and then people are busy. At this point, you've reached that milestone. I feel, I mean, everybody would be excited. And just CC me on it, so that if there is somebody that I know that I can open a door for a team, that would be phenomenal. I think the autonomy lies with you. Just with the word of caution, just make sure that you are at the driver's seat and you do what you really believe. And I think this has been the most joyful part of this class, is all teams have had this anchor somehow of thinking about frugal science as both a technological and a social enterprise. I was not surprised that that happened, but I think many of you brought up that social context far more deeply than I had first anticipated, which really is joyful. Because, I mean, we know how to do technology. I don't think we know how to deploy and build technology for people per se. So, um, okay, let's take more questions first, and then we'll just open up to a broader discussion. Yeah, I think Emmanuel had a great point right here. Find mentors you're comfortable with sharing your ideas with, and almost to a point where they're partners in this exercise with you. Uh, I'm seeing for the FS community. Yeah, Rico, do you want to say a word or two about the broader the UNSDG communities?
Well, I don't know. I'm not an expert on it by any stretch of the imagination, but as this class is also in a bit of a cloud, I suppose the UN has created a structure where efforts to help solve global issues can be um, given some framework to sit inside and I guess have some visibility, maybe even. So I think especially some of the projects like the elephant tracking or the mines or the ones that the epilepsy projects, those kinds of things have such massive global potential to solve really important issues that I think attaching a UN SDG marker to it might gain you some potential collaboration from larger organizations. That's just sort of a 5 a.m. thought in my head.
Yeah, no, I think the SDG have been a quite a remarkable way to tracking progress of all of us on the planet per se, and binning those sets of ideas. And I think there is also there is a sense of people can, if you're making an elevator pitch, it really helps to say, okay, this fits right in this broader class or category of problems. Um, I am aware of, for example, of the larger communities. because I think there is a very broad class of open hardware community out there. There is a very broad class of engineers without borders. There's a very broad class of these types of entities that are out there. And I think uh, my always my intuition has been is to use those kinds of structures to find the right connections. But in the end, it boils down to people. And it's those very specific individuals that are really sort of like, for example, Isaac in many of his presentations and talk very clearly described a very broad range of people that they reached out who offered help. But in the end, it also just needs to still be a project that Isaac and the Frenzyme team is running, because you still have to anchor yourself in what do you want to achieve as a subgroup. The biggest worry that ends up happening in these broader perspectives is that then you're a contributor in the broader landscape, but then you get lost. This is the piece that we want to focus on, and if you can't focus on that piece, I think, yeah, Subir said it perfectly. It's you have to be the personal owner, because only then can you push yourself to the bounds. And I think the ownership of all these projects belong to all of you. I mean, of course, many of us as mentors have contributed in ways and forms that we thought is the right direction. But the big lesson here is not just the technical lesson, but how to manage projects that they remain true to their core of the participants. So, uh, I think, yeah, you guys should keep that in mind. These are your projects in the end. Uh, I know Sheetal had a very important point about meeting once a month. And just as a catch up for teams, it will be highly motivating because your team might not have met for a month. And you come to that meeting and then you look at all this other team has now done this, and this is like, we got to get back in the game again. I think that's a fantastic, fabulous idea. If everybody agrees, let's just set it on anyway. And we will see that these types of communities have a sense of breathing. My intuition is we're going to shrink a little bit because Christmas is coming and all that stuff. It doesn't matter if you can't join one time, you join the next time. There's tons of updates on just the science that if I wish I had more classes that I would love to share of what's unfolding and happening. And so I think we will always figure out a way to fill that time with all kinds of technical updates and joyful things and just what all of you are doing. So if everybody agrees, let's at least start with once a month. And my intuition is it could be more, but we will keep that very organic. And then people should come prepared. If you want to share something, then do come prepared for it so that you are, I think you have essentially 50 or 100 people's brains and they are all listening to you and contributing to the work that you might present. But we will try to keep them informal. So we'll just have a running agenda and a once a month meeting. And anybody can add anything to the agenda item and anybody can comment on those agenda items as well. Okay, other comments and questions? Any other questions that I haven't covered that people feel comfortable asking publicly as well? Of course, you can always reach out and ask sort of things privately too, but I'm just curious on maybe one comment I forgot to mention is, of course, many of you have focused on, and again, I've heard that several times. I just wish I could also have been more available. So I just want to apologize first in advance of it's been a very difficult time just for me from a timing perspective on what has been happening on COVID front. But on the other hand, we don't have a choice, unfortunately, with what's unfolding. But my hope is that starting in a couple more weeks, those things will, I don't know, who knows what happens. Let's not predict anything. But life might come, there might be some semblance of normalcy somewhere. But the comment I wanted to make was the actual important people that I want you to focus on beyond getting feedback and mentorship and ideas and discussions is really connecting with who your end user for the products that all of you are building. To me, that is more important, frankly, than the so-called mentors. And I'm not trying to ditch anything. I mean, as a role that I play, I know that role is important, but I'm also just stating that if in your perspective, you are all perfectly poised at this point to take your ideas and put it in the hand of somebody. So Floor, I'll use Floor's team as an example. She has something that might look like, something that's put together. Literally putting it, whatever it looks like, in the hand of a kid who is your target is probably the most important thing all the teams can do right now. Because what it would do, I think often enough is said that we as scientists sometimes have this tendency that unless it's perfect, we don't like to show. I mean, there's an analogy of it as a baby that, oh, you always think that your baby is not just perfect. And you have to really make sure that you can get that kind of feedback, because it might completely change what you're thinking about. So one big advice to all the teams before we meet next time in a month's time is to show it to, yeah. And I think it's very important to be thinking about not to be perfect in that perspective. Identify who you were trying to support and help, and get that out. And those are the people that I would knock and on their doors to make sure that you have somebody who's actually the end user, maybe even a naive end user who would never have heard of it or thought about these ideas, to give you feedback. So like for Subir's team, actually reaching out a villager that tackles elephants on a weekly basis with a stick in the middle of the night, he will just tell you his mind immediately. I mean, that would be phenomenal. And I think I wasn't emphasizing on that too much because that takes time in the class, and I wanted you guys to have something to show. You all have something to show now. And for some of you who are working on projects that have a very specific user group, this would be the time to reach out. And I think classically, these types of classes are also we run them in multi-semester, where the first one is focused on ideas and feedback, and then the second one is on execution. We're kind of more execution oriented first because we wanted to make sure that we have an idea that we care about. Now that has happened, the next phase will move towards getting a lot more feedback from the people that you are trying to engage. Um, and I'm trying to follow up some of the comments. So Leo has a question. Could you comment on the relationship between OpenSense and promotion? I'm thinking about it in a context of a message about getting publicity. For example, on one hand, I see the obvious benefits. And on the other hand, I think it runs the risk of bloating the community in a manner you were warning. How do you document and conduct a project openly in a manner? And goals, yeah. Really tough question, Leo. And just give me 1 second. There's a fridge passing by. I think I have a fairly strong opinion about this. And again, this is just opinion. Everybody should have their own opinions on this. We are the internal tickers of value of an idea and knowing where we are. Whenever you ask yourself honestly, you always know the answer, just to yourself. And I think one of the thread that ends up happening is there is timing associated with this, that when a project is ready for a larger scale engagement, if that happens a little too early, that is often the demise of a project like that, because then suddenly you're chasing many of those threads while the core is just not so mature and solid yet. And on the other hand, there is also a point where after you know that you have something, now you want to scale it, it becomes important for other people to know about it. And there is this fine balance between making sure that you truly have something uh, that is ready. And I think there is a little bit of this internal aspect. So in the current phase that you're all in, I would much rather have you focus on the users that you're trying to help and have them give you the kind of feedback. And then post that, incorporating into that, when certain sets of projects will reach the level of maturity that now the most important thing is new resources on the table and scale up. That's really when a much broader, but I think the tension that you described, Leo, was the openness. And I think this is something of just how we've all come together. And again, going back to that personal ownership, individual teams should decide how open they want to be. Literally, one team could just say, look, I like the 5 people that are in our team. Let's just go with it. And we don't want to now have more number of people, more number of relationships. Just personally, there is a bandwidth associated with this as well. And you could just say, for the next 6 months, we're going to just accomplish what we said. That's a completely fair approach. While another approach can be, is look, everything that we do, somebody else could build upon it. So let's just make sure that we are documenting very well. We did that for all our COVID projects, and that was a phenomenal step. Uh, so you should remember that this will be individual decisions that you all make in your team meetings. People can come from many different views, and there is really no one way. You just don't want to be overwhelmed by the unimportant things in a project. And that is the hardest decision to make, of what is important and what is not important, which is much more internal rather than external. Sometimes engaging with the broader community is the most important thing in the project. And then you do want to make some noise. You do want to be noticed so that the right kind of people will be listening to you. But on the other hand, if you're not ready, we saw this in COVID a ton, where there were sets of projects that suddenly became, everybody was talking about it, but then when you look under the hood, they were just not ready. And it actually led to a much more, the kind of critical assessment that just that project was not ready for. So it's a tough one, but I think the thread would be, uh, what I want to do is, this is also where our sort of a community as the class matters, is because we are linked. We already have a very strong network. Like literally all of us know 100 people. And so if one team says that, look, we really need funding, we need $10,000 for us to truly be able to support this one person in our team who is a very important member, and just it is impossible right now to proceed, we would just use our network to be able to get that kind of resources in some sense, because just there is enough of us, know enough people that we can pull that through. And yeah, there's a lot of things moving around in the background. Um, and I think this is also why when we do these monthly calls, we will also just do a call from every team that could say, hey, here is the most important thing. If we had this, we could really use help on that. Now, there might be a project that could say, if we really could get this kind of a resource accessible, suddenly it would move our project leaps and bounds. And then, of course, all the common resources that we have amongst projects. So there might be a project that already has something that you want. As long as that project is open about it, we will have a cross platform. Like, I know so many of you have been working on paper-based systems. One team figures it out, you should feel perfectly open to pass all of that to another team to modify it to use in a totally different context. While you keep pursuing, like, Subir and team has this beautiful way of thinking about mouse, I was already thinking like 100 other places that I want to use a system like that, but their team might not have the bandwidth. You guys can complete, and this is also what I mean by a close-knit community too, that individually amongst each other, we should really be sharing these kinds of resources. Okay, let's keep going through any other sets of questions that
And I saw
addressed.
one, Manu, from Sasha about potential for forming new teams of, I guess, I'm guessing some folks maybe are, if they're less interested in their current team, or if their current team has fewer people.
Yeah. So what I'm going to do is, when I get a little bit of a bandwidth, is I'm going to curate the idea board a little bit. People can still build new teams around anything. You can always join another team. I think that would be fabulous in some sense, because there is a trusted network already, and you kind of reach the end of the road for what you were trying to do with your team. It's, I think, no good way to say this, but if you don't abandon the most brilliant idea you're working on right now, you'll never be able to work on even more brilliant idea that your friends need help with. So it's perfectly okay. And I just never use the word abandon for a project. I call it back burner. Hundreds of projects sit on back burners, and then suddenly something clicks in your brain, and that thing that was on a back burner, and I know many of you who are in this situation have this already. So there's no shame, there's nothing about changing course, changing directions, joining teams. I think I can just imagine that uh, we shouldn't, even though the problem is hard and the progress is limited, we should not abandon it because of that. Uh, that is actually the reason to keep pushing on that. Uh, in some sense, so as long as you keep, honestly be thinking about that, you're not making your decision based on the amount of past progress, but you're just, do you get joy in what you do every day? That's the criteria. If that is not happening, then abandon ship immediately. And if that joy is there, then continue. And I think this is the hard part, because sometimes there is always a tendency, and we all fall into this, of doing too many things. And there is a it's a tough one. I think sometimes doing too many, and I'm sure you all do incredible number of things. I've looked through many of you and your web pages and other things, so I already know 100 other things that are all on your plates. But it would be very valuable to think about this as a, don't give up on the hard problems. Like, I think what I truly saw, for example, space debris as a team, it is such an incredibly hard problem, but that is exactly why a group like this should be thinking about it, because otherwise the other folks who will be thinking about it will have $1 billion budget, and they will not come up with the solutions that you're thinking about. Other questions? And then, of course, we should just open it up to comments right now. Anybody wants to chime in, just completely open comments. I think, again, these are just guidelines. I'm not here to set any rules for any of you. Uh, I've learned a few things for what I know works and doesn't work. And I do know that the ultra large groups just kind of, there's no sense of trust that you can have a real conversation with people. But comments, I see a question about funding. Um, yeah, I think that would be a fabulous idea on the funding side, to set up and share the kinds of opportunities that open up for the education folks. I don't know if you just saw, the World Bank just announced a bazillion $1 million program for 5 to 10 countries: Sierra Leone, Pakistan. I think there's 10 countries listed, with a massive program around revamping education. Fabulous for many teams that are working on education here. And I think it would be valuable if we have a common place that we share these types of resources. Success of one team here is success of all teams in some sense. I mean, I don't know if you believe in that. I do believe in that, because frankly, we are here to solve problems. And if you find something and then this will help another team, it would be fabulous for you to be able to share that and support that other team in any way and form, because is a common saying, somehow the more credit you share, the more it grows, which is quite non-intuitive sometimes, but in the end it actually helps, because if you are engaged and another team is helping you in that front, just acknowledge that, and they will be even more happy to help. So I'm seeing several other comments on funding.
Yeah, one quick thing. I think that sounds perfect for the resources side of things. Maybe I'll plan to create a Notion page. Actually, we already have a Notion page on resources, but we'll make that more open so that people can now post kind of like idea board resources that you have and are willing to share. And then separately, we can maybe make a Discord as well for people that are just asking and talking about resources that they might need.
Yeah, and then the thing that, Tyler, we should do is we should also curate and cull the little bit of the Discord, that because when there's too much, sometimes it becomes hard. If there is a streamline of channels, that would actually be very valuable.
Yeah, I'll look into doing that. I know right now, I think it looks relatively normal for most people, but for you and I, it looks terrible because it's like infinite channels. So I'll see if we can do a better organization.
I'm just thinking about anything that can be archived temporarily. The other comment I want to make about this is, I think for the next 6 months, I'm just thinking about, let's focus on achieving the goals we're trying to achieve. And then depending on where we are in the next 6 months, I think there will be a way to, and again, it might also be just where the pandemic is currently. Uh, that's when I will start thinking a little bit about acceleration phase of when we truly have something so tangible that I think currently we want to put our head down and get to a point, something that is ready for acceleration. But post that happens, I think I've been thinking about this model for what I call medium scale trials. And I think maybe I'll mention this again as a repetition. The big lesson that we learned from Foldscope was not, I mean, of course, developing the tool was a really valuable starting point, but we had made this decision, totally arbitrary decision that I had made, which is let's ship 50,000 Foldscopes to anybody who asks for it. There was no funding behind it. We paid, $75,000, I remember, just in shipping to people around the world. And it was that was kind of almost that chaotic acceleration phase that we did, because we were then truly looking for the community of users who could take what we had done and run with it in any other direction that they want. And there is a right time for doing something like that for every project, which is kind of an acceleration phase. So in 6 months or so from now, we will think about it for every project. What is now the best way to engage the broader community to run with it? I mean, open source projects do this all the time. When there is a release, that's when they say, look, at this point, we have checked off something, that there is a milestone that we have met, and that milestone now enables other people to build on top of your work. And that is done in a very strategic manner because it needs to truly be a platform. And so many of the things that you're working on are platforms. And in 6 months or so from now, we will discuss and talk about that idea very specifically for individual projects to be thinking about is, when is the moment when the ownership goes even away from your team to the world? When does your project truly is owned by literally any kid that wakes up, opens up their laptop, sees this website and says, hey, I can do this. And then they are the owner of that project. It's a really powerful moment when that happens. And you have to plan for it very strategically, where another person engaging truly feels the same level of passion that you're feeling. And I think from certain projects, the goals are so ambitious and large. Like, for example, the project that's trying to build recycling tools for lab grade plastic. I can imagine there is a critical point when you've demonstrated it. Literally 10% of the labs in a given country could engage, and that would be a huge jump. While you don't have to do anything, you really have to just provide them what they should be doing. So we're not there yet. There is a time point that we will start thinking about the acceleration phase. But this will come, I mean, of course, you always have to be thinking about strategies around that. But on the other hand, you have to not be so bogged by that thought that you can't make progress. Okay, so I think I covered most of the things that I wanted to say. So for the next 20 minutes or so, I just want to listen in terms of thinking about, I think lots of ideas already came through in the chat. Is there something that we have not covered at all? Okay, maybe one thing that I'll just mention is, since Fer mentioned PES Global, um, for Spanish speaking folks, they probably know this as PES is for pufferfish. That's the name of our ventilator project. And that is one example in which we decided to partner with industrial partners really early on. And we literally passed the ownership of the project to industrial manufacturing partners. So there's a partner in India, there's a partner in Nepal, there's a partner in Kenya. And we did technology transfer while we were developing the technology, that at this point, I mean, we're not hands off yet, but in 2 to 3 months' time, I believe we will be in a position that the manufacturing partner in Kenya can take complete ownership of manufacturing the first full featured ventilator in Africa. I mean, that's the level of, it took a long while. It took like last 6 months to get them up to speed with that level of capacity for them to engage. But it's almost essentially where industrial partners can be incredibly uh, fantastic partners if you choose them well. If you don't choose them well, then it's not really clear, because then they are not executing on your vision or mission. They are executing on whatever they value. So it's, I think only after this pandemic have I become a lot more open to engaging with broader groups of models of how do we get our ideas and technologies in hands of industrial partners that have the capacity. And as long as you can steer a project in a manner like we work with Boston Scientific last several months ago, and my view of them as an entity has changed because of that engagement. And I think many of you who are thinking about it will reach those milestones to say whether it's a good idea to engage with those types of entities, or whether to go and create those entities yourself, of course. That is always a model. So keep that in mind. I think it's a very valuable space to think about, because sometimes suddenly the resources that can come to a project, and especially the people resources, is quite valuable. Go ahead, Sonali.
Yes, so I have a question over here. So, especially if this is in the broader context of global health and in the specific context of frugal onco, even when we, the challenge is that even when we go ahead to developing uh, a platform for diagnosis in the context of prevention of a disease like cancer or infectious diseases, the key challenge is validation. Why would anybody even want to hear from a group of kind of amateurs who are working on using literature based information to develop frugal diagnostic assay kit when there are companies who are invested in this? So audience is the key, and belief and trust, and then validation. So how do we go about even addressing such a question? We might even work on it for a year and have monthly meetings or bi-weekly meetings, but then the question is, why would people trust us?
Yeah, I think, I mean, that's a really important point. And I think this is also where you have to realize the world is filled with all kinds of noise. And even before somebody else trusting, you have to just also ask yourself, how do you trust what your own creation, especially if it's in the medical realm? Would you use your own creation? Has it reached the level of capacity? And it goes back to that cost performance metric. Often enough with cost, it's associated, you can't hit that performance, but you are in perfect position to demonstrate what you can do. I think you're absolutely right. For certain sets of things, the resources become limited, but being agile about, uh, sometimes you are providing an approach that approach, if explored further, can open an avenue. But it's just that approach was so fresh because it was kept with cost in mind, and then many more people can build on top of it. It takes a long time to bring a solution to market in a health context, and that level of trust sort of comes from the past work itself, That level of trust also just comes from your transparency. When you really let the data do the talking. This is why Leo's question was so interesting, is because sometimes in most of the noise that gets created, it's not the data that's doing the talking. It's, I think with many tools that you all are making, those tools, people can experience those tools and see for themselves. I think for several sets of teams where the outcomes have a very clinical anchor to it, there is a point of time in which the clinical evaluation will begin, and that is what would dictate whether that approach really works or not. But you have to also remember, you're not trying to compete with everything that's out there. You are trying to provide solutions for a very specific and often enough a unique user group. So as long as you believe that all of these big pharma companies are not addressing the problem for this community and you have something to offer, you should still be proud of yourself, independent of how the pharma product. I mean, this is a good example for the ultrasound team. I mean, the butterflies of the world in Palo Alto and the best ultrasound machines, every doctor is going to find that shiny, sparkly thing very exciting. But frankly, is a rural primary health center, if it's going to be that 10-15 years from now that technology would be available, while you have something that moves the needle in the positive direction. I often think of that way as an internal check mark. And if it doesn't, then of course you shouldn't get it out there. But it's very important to not judge yourself. You know, these companies would have thousands of people working on these products, but they don't have what you have, which is plasticity and flexibility. You can spin on a dime. Two of you can be on a call to say, look, the last 6 months it was all wrong. Here is the reason. Let's do this. That's it. I mean, imagine doing that in a 2,000 people company where you've spent $15 million and the only solution now is to add one more gizmo to it, which is going to change the cost another order of magnitude. What would you do? You just can't just disrupt everything. So play to your advantages. Sometimes you also have to choose problems. Like, I think there is a safety risk associated with certain kinds of problems, and you have to acknowledge that. In no circumstances, do no harm is still the most important lesson. And if you feel that your project has that, then you just have to put more resources. You have to build more safety into your device. And I mean, I think there's a fine balance, but I would never judge yourself from kind of this external lens. I would judge yourself from, if there is nobody addressing the community that you're trying to address, and that moves the needle in the positive direction for them, I think it's fair, because you shouldn't try to solve everybody's problems. Then you solve nobody's problems. But yeah, it's a very valid point. And I think, your credibility and stuff, it comes over time. As Madhu said, I mean, we have all slogged for it for some time. And that comes from our just networks. And eventually, if there is solid, it's not even having data. If there is a solid clarity that this is the right approach, it just comes over time. Other comments, questions, feedback. This is now turning into just an open session for the last 10-15 minutes. Anybody wants to chime in, share anything that's on your mind?
Hello,
Open mic.
can you hear me?
Go ahead, Deborah.
Yes, I have a very important question, because sometimes I keep thinking back of the very first session and I wonder if anyone ever figured out why the wet paper strips curl.
Ah, you make
really
me
wanna
so
know.
happy. Anybody?
Please, I can't sleep.
Okay, so it comes from the molecular chirality itself. So one of the beautiful things about kind of science is that, things line up in a manner where certain phenomena at the smallest scale can give rise to another sort of a thing at the next scale that gives rise to another thing at the next scale. There was a really beautiful paper that came out maybe almost a year ago, where, I mean, all of you know that many of our, I mean, actually all biomolecules have chirality. And they showed that literally a chirality in one single molecule in Drosophila, these flies, was leading to the chirality of the left-handed and right-handedness of where the heart and where the parts would be in an entire organism. But it was not so obvious that, oh, this one thing immediately, this one thing leads to another thing that leads to another thing. And after 4 layers, you see something macroscopic as a, so this is a very common theme that happens in many, many systems where, because of chirality that's structured, and again, I think the other part of this is just also the reason that I had brought up examples like this is that we often take for granted just the most common objects. And I had this experience personally in one of the COVID diagnostic tests that we are running right now. It was just such a mundane thing that I had always assumed, and it turned out to be the most important factor in the device finally. And I think keep that, the lesson to learn also from there is, some of you do more basic science and some of you do more applied science. And remember that one feeds the other. And it's not, sometimes, we often have a tendency to say is like, oh, what is this good for? What is the application of something? And just people will ask you all this time, why are you studying all this? What? And you have to let that tendency go away. It's perfectly okay to not know the purpose of something until a moment comes, and then you feel like, okay, I do actually uh, I do now know why this is actually important.
Yeah, thank you so much for giving me an answer and for this course. And it's hard to put in words how much this course meant to me and probably to many here. So I'm really happy and looking forward to more meetings and sessions and keeping the spirit alive.
So Manu, some students in the beginning of the class wondered whether you'll be interested in publishing something about the philosophy of the class. There's something that goes out there. I mean, some suggested New York Times article in the Science magazine or somewhere else, but where, the concept of the class.
Yeah, I think, that is something that I thought about really on the early side. And what I would propose is that we all write something as a community, which would be sort of a call in some sense of shattering what we believe a class should be. Or I think it would be a fabulous idea to be able to share this as a nugget to the rest of the world. I think Iqbal and several others were already talking about this notion of how to structure these types of classes in different environments. And I think I'm really thinking of it much more as internal reflections. If we put our internal reflections in a document, I know they will be useful for other people as well. So I think I would be very excited about it. And I think we should do it in a manner that will allow us to truly capture the spirit of it collectively. I think there is something about when we are trying to always complain about what is wrong in academia and why is knowledge not free. And I think the challenge is we never provide enough alternative models. And the way that I'm thinking about in a post-pandemic world, where are the other alternative models of these types of engagements and solidifying them somehow? So as long as we're providing something that other people could build on, it would be absolutely fabulous, Emmanuel, for us to collectively write something. Yeah, I think I'm all for it. It's we should all sleep on it too, because I'm sure after some time on a Christmas break, here's the homework for everybody. The first time we, sorry to assign, first time we will meet in January, we will all kind of try writing a paragraph or two about what is about this philosophy or something, and literally for a kind of article that we might write, for some of that we might want to just have words from everybody, literally directly including coding you. That way, the voice is not tempered in any way. You will have a singular opinion and you're able to say that as well. While think a little bit about this suggestion. I mean, I've been thinking about writing much broader sets of pieces around frugal science in general, but this is a very specific one which the world needs right now. Because I think, should we just go back to our old self when the vaccines come? And I think I have often felt this, that unless there are alternative models, we as humans have such a common tendency to go back to our comfort zones. It was the first call, I still remember. I had no idea who was going to connect. I mean, we had just posted something on the internet. And there's this implicit model in this, that it's the same thing when I walk into my class that I teach here, but I just imply somehow that, oh, just because people are here, which is totally baseless in some sense. I mean, just it's still a group of strangers, but over a period of time, we are not a group of strangers. And I think it's a very important lesson. Just, you also have to trust your instincts as well. And we put each other in checks as well, because then we learn and observe from each other to say, what is this characteristic about an individual or a person or a team that we like, and let's mirror that. So I feel I've grown tremendously just teaching this class, and I think the hope is that that happened for everybody as well.
I would like to
Go ahead, Fer.
contribute on this part, on the what do we take for granted part. I mean, not only on the social science part, but also on the design part and the science part. But assuming that this kind of classes occur is also part of the problem. I mean, actually doing it and making pretty concise steps on achieving certain milestones really provide the tools on not taking for granted what isn't taken for granted. It's like this, I'm not sure if I'm explaining myself, but I think that also the really well, this kind of networks contribute on making weak ties stronger. So the friend of a friend can be a really good friend of another friend. And making that statement really clear on documents, or how do I even met people like Flor, for example, that is on Mexico through as like, it's really amazing. So I just wanted to state that as part of this exercise. So thank you so much again.
One request that I have, if one of you could make a map of the world with where all of us are from, with a little icon, I mean, it would be just fabulous to share. And again, I think, of course, this is a smaller group, but for the whole class, it would be fabulous to make these connections and these obvious things. The fact that Fur and Floor are much closer to each other, but right now there's no geography, but it would be valuable to place that in some geographical context as well. Any other kind of last minute comments? Otherwise, we will meet. I will send out times for one-to-one meetings. I want to do that sooner rather than later, because I want to make sure that people have some sets of threads to think about, and kind of, if people have to make some immediate decisions in their teams, you can bounce off your decisions with me. I'll try to do that probably in a 2 weeks time. And the idea would be is, again, this is just an optional thing, but I want to just make sure that if any sets of teams are on critical decision points and it's not obvious what is the obvious next step for them is, then we should definitely kind of chat. We're going to keep all the communication channels open. So I think we'll keep using Discord, we'll keep using Notion. Eventually, once I get a little bit of time, I'm going to try to clean up the class website to include all the class presentations for people who are willing to share that, Notion pages for the projects for the people who are willing to share that. And then also, we will kind of set an agenda document. And then this agenda document, Tyler, we'll do the same thing that we do with N95 Decon. So before the start of these monthly get-togethers, anybody can write any agenda item in there, and then we'll run through it. Some of them require 10 seconds, other require detailed discussions, but then we will try to keep it also focused on content. So every time we meet, we're sharing progress from any team that wants to share progress. And hopefully when this pandemic is over, we will do some kind of a boot camp where for a week we can physically be somewhere actually working together. I think that just would be fabulous, but we just have to figure out when we could do that. It would be remarkable to meet all of you in person. You've all meant so much to everybody around here. And I know it's not a trivial thing. It may be possible, maybe that's not possible, but it would be just, we can still dream of one day actually getting together. Okay, on that
And I
note,
guess, yeah, as we're getting closer to closing, I think I didn't get my chance to say my thank yous yet either. So just to steal a little bit, yeah, everyone, I mean, everything's been said by you already, Manu, but I think just, yeah, like it's been like the most amazing experience. I can't possibly, like I've never TA'd anything before, and I suspect that no one has ever TA'd anything like this before, because this was not at all like a chore. Like this was like I think I just felt so honored to be able to, interact with all of these amazing people, like all of you just, messaging me at random hours. That was like the coolest thing ever. Cause I feel like it was basically like I got thrown into a place where suddenly like all of these amazing scientists around the world, like imagine if you're a grad student and you're ready to do this very specific grad school project, and then suddenly someone says, hey, I'm going to get, 700 amazing scientists from around the world, and they're going to message you random questions about these really incredible projects they're working on that you have no idea how to answer. Like that's basically been me for the past, however many weeks. And it's been so fun and just really, really inspiring. So yeah, thank you all so much. And of course you, Manu, as well. I think I've sent you a message privately as well, but yeah, this has been absolutely just a completely game-changing experience. And it's like totally changed how my brain works. So amazing.
Okay, on that note, I'm looking at Rico's background there. Let's go to the moon. Okay, bye everybody.